Larceny and Old Lace is very funny and ultimately a brilliant episode of The Golden Girls. This is the 21st episode of the third season. It's directed by Terry Hughes, and of course, as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. I was very excited because from the very beginning, we learn that Sophia has a new friend called Rocco, and he's played by Mickey Rooney, which I was very, very excited about. And I have to say, he's brilliant in this. He's not in it as much as I would have liked, but we do get a reasonable amount of the character. And they actually met down at the police station, and it seems like Rocco has a bit of a sketchy past. Dorothy is not happy that Sophia is spending time with them. She's not happy that he's playing strip poker with her mother, and ultimately Dorothy just doesn't want him to be around at all. But Sophia seems to be quite happy, and we then have a subplot, and Rose asks Dorothy if she thinks Blanche has been picking on her. And perfect timing, Blanche comes into the kitchen and calls Rose an empty-headed Mary Poppins knockoff, which is mean but very funny. And when Rose is out of the room, Blanche reveals to Dorothy that she found Rose's diary and she read Rose's diary. She picked the lock and read the diary, and some of it said, and I quote, "I don't know how much longer I can stand living here with these two pigs." Now, I'll be honest, it was very obvious what was going on. And I feel like maybe it was meant to be obvious. I'd love to know if anybody else watched it and didn't pick up on this straight away, but I'm usually not good at seeing things that are obvious. So, at least in terms of certain narratives. So the fact that as soon as she read that, and I worked out immediately what was going on with the diary, I don't know, it just felt a little bit too obvious for my liking. And I will, of course, explain what it is when we get there chronologically. Rocco then comes in with a trolley of his stuff, and actually before that we have a very, very funny scene where Dorothy doesn't want to read the diary, and Blanche leaves the room, and Dorothy coughs to mask her hitting the diary on the table to try and open it, and just Blanche catching her red-handed, and then Dorothy kind of frozen in headlights. Very, very funny. Rocco then comes in with a trolley full of his stuff, and then Rose catches Dorothy and Blanche with the diary. And we have, I feel like we haven't had a scene with Sophia in bed in a while, but they all go to Sophia at night time because they're all having difficulty sleeping because of this problem with the diary. Understandably, Rose is furious that they read her diary. And Sophia just wants everybody out of the room, so she tells them to leave a message at the beep. And then Rose begins to leave a message from outside the door, which I loved. Rose then comes in and they talk about what happened. And it became very, very obvious that my suspicions were correct, that it wasn't a recent diary, and that Rose was actually talking about two actual pigs. And I feel like had they not mentioned pigs, had Rose maybe said, "I don't know how much longer I can stand living with these two," maybe it wouldn't have been as obvious, but because we know that Rose grew up around animals, I just think it was too obvious. So they could have done a better job of hiding it, maybe making it a little bit more suspenseful. But nevertheless, it played out well enough, and Sophia throws a bag of money to get them out of the room. Well, she throws it back. She didn't know it was full of money. And the bag spills open. Money comes tumbling out. And they realise that Rocco must have robbed the bank when they went to it. And at that perfect moment, Rocco happens to be on the phone and admits he robbed the bank, but he did it for love. We'll come back to that in a bit. We then have a moment where Dorothy, Rose, and Blanche are sitting around the kitchen table talking about romantic moments and romantic gestures. Dorothy tells a story of how she swallowed her engagement ring, and she said it turned up 3 days later. And Rose said, "Where did it turn up, Dorothy?" Which in itself was funny, but Blanche's facial expression was just fantastic. And then Dorothy's response on the Home Shopping Network, I absolutely loved it. We're then back in the garden, and honestly the next two scenes, or the final two scenes, and they're absolutely brilliant. Rocco creeps into the garden to see Sophia, and I didn't pick up on this until now. Sophia asked him, "How did you rob that bank?" And the way Rocco began talking about it, really excited about telling this story, I kind of realised this seems like a fantasy. And that's when I realised, just before Rocco revealed it, that that's not what happened at all. And he does confess that actually he didn't rob the bank, he'd taken out his life savings. And he was never this big gangster, and it was all a lie. And he took out his savings because he wanted to treat Sophia like the queen that he sees her for. And Sophia says, "You always treat me like a queen," which was so lovely and just a really beautiful scene. The final scene is very, very funny. The girls, minus Sophia, are playing a trivia game. Rose gets a question right. That's a really difficult question. She goes off on a Looney Tunes story, and it was really good fun. I really enjoyed it. Sophia then phones. Dorothy answers, and Sophia tells her that she's staying the night at Rocco's. And of course, Dorothy's not having that and says that while you live under our roof, you'll live by our rules, and basically talks to her like she's a teenager. Very well written, very funny, one sided phone call. And I had a lot of fun with it. It was a great way to end the episode. Really solid episode. The only thing that could have been better, well, I would have liked a little bit more Rocco, but I have to say that final scene with Rocco was so brilliantly executed that it really made up for that. And the only other thing that would have made it better is if they'd maybe changed the wording in Rose's diary so that it maybe wasn't as obvious as soon as Blanche said it, that it clearly wasn't a diary from just now. So a few things could have been better, but otherwise it's a really solid episode. Larceny and Old Lace is very funny. Definitely a really brilliant episode of The Golden Girls, and ultimately one that I really enjoyed.